The afternoon sun filtered through the curtains of my bedroom, casting long shadows across the floor. I remember how the dust particles danced in the beams of light, such a trivial detail to notice when your mind is made up about ending everything. My name is Sophia Waltz, and at 17, I believed I had reached the end of my path. My trembling hands held the bottle of pills I'd stolen from my mother's medicine cabinet. 36 tablets. I had calculated it would be enough. The pregnancy test on my bathroom counter had shown positive that morning, the second one I'd taken, just to be sure. Thomas had been clear when I called him. That's your problem, not mine. The ache in my chest felt physical, like something was literally breaking inside me. How had my life come to this? 6 months ago, I'd been planning for college, dreaming about studying abroad, imagining a future full of possibilities. Now I was pregnant, alone, and terrified of telling my parents. The party where it happened kept replaying in my mind. The music had been too loud, the drinks too strong, and Thomas had seemed so different from the boys at church. Dangerous, exciting. My parents had warned me about straying from the faith, but I had dismissed their concerns as old-fashioned. Now their disappointed faces haunted my imagination, and I couldn't bear the thought of seeing that disappointment become reality. I wrote a brief note, apologizing for everything, for the shame I would bring them, for not being the daughter they deserved, for taking the coward's way out. I placed it on my desk, next to the framed photo of our family at the Grand Canyon last summer, all of us smiling, unaware of what was to come. With shaking hands, I unscrewed the cap of the bottle. The pills rattled against the plastic, each tiny sound like a gavel coming down on my life. I poured a handful into my palm, staring at them. This was it. No more pain, no more shame, no more difficult decisions. I filled a glass with water from the bathroom sink. The pipes groaned, another mundane detail that seemed suddenly profound. I swallowed the first batch of pills, then another, until the bottle was empty. The bitterness lingered on my tongue as I walked back to my bed, lay down, and closed my eyes. I hadn't prayed in months, but as the dizziness began to take hold, I found myself whispering, "God, if you're real, if you're listening, help me." The darkness came quickly after that. The first thing I became aware of was the abrupt cessation of pain. One moment, my body was in agony, convulsing, my heart racing chaotically, my lungs struggling for air, and the next, everything was still, peaceful. I felt as though I had been suddenly released from a vice that had been crushing me. I opened my eyes and found myself looking down at my own body, sprawled awkwardly across my bed. My skin had taken on a grayish-blue tinge, and a thin line of spittle trailed from the corner of my mouth to the pillow. The empty pill bottle had fallen to the floor beside my outstretched hand. The scene looked simultaneously intimate and foreign, like looking at an old photograph of yourself that you don't remember taking. That's me, I thought, surprised by the lack of panic I felt. It was more like curiosity, as if I were observing something interesting but ultimately unrelated to myself. I became aware that I was hovering near the ceiling of my bedroom. I couldn't feel my body anymore, not in the usual way. I had no heartbeat, no breath, no weight. Instead, I existed as pure consciousness, perceiving everything with a clarity I had never experienced before. The colors in my room were more vivid, the sounds from outside more distinct. I could hear my neighbor's wind chimes 3 houses down, the distant bark of a dog, the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. As I floated there, the door to my bedroom burst open. My mother stood in the doorway, her expression transforming from irritation to confusion to horror in the space of seconds. "Sophia," she called, her voice tight with the beginning of panic. "Sophia," she rushed to my body, shaking my shoulders roughly. "Sophia, wake up. What did you do?" Her eyes fell on the empty pill bottle, and she let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. "No, no, no," she fumbled for her cell phone, dialing frantically while keeping her free hand on my wrist, searching for a pulse. I wanted to tell her I was right there, watching everything, but I had no way to communicate. I was completely disconnected from my physical form. 911? Please help. My daughter, she's taken pills. She's not breathing right. Please hurry, my mother's voice cracked as she gave our address. Then she dropped the phone and began chest compressions, all while tears streamed down her face. Don't you dare leave me, Sophia, she sobbed between counts. Don't you dare. I felt a strange tug, as if someone had tied a gossamer thread around my consciousness. It was gently pulling. The scene of my mother trying to revive my body began to recede, growing smaller and dimmer. I was moving away, but not in any physical direction I could name. It was more like I was shifting from one reality to another. As my bedroom faded from view, I passed through the ceiling and roof as if they weren't there. Outside, the afternoon sun was setting, painting the sky in breathtaking hues of orange and purple. For a moment, I hovered above my neighborhood, seeing it all at once, the patterns of streets, the houses with their neat yards, the cars moving along, carrying people wrapped up in lives that suddenly seemed so fragile and precious. Time seemed to function differently. I was aware of paramedics arriving at our house, rushing inside with equipment and urgent voices. I saw my father's car speeding down the street, having been called by my mother. I watched as they loaded my body into the ambulance, my mother climbing in beside me, clutching my limp hand. I could feel her love and desperation reaching out to me across the growing divide. But I was continuing to move away. The neighborhood shrank beneath me, becoming a patchwork of lights and shadows. I felt myself accelerating upward and outward, the earth's curvature becoming visible as I ascended. Yet it wasn't frightening. It felt natural, like returning to somewhere I'd been before. Then I noticed a soft light beginning to form in the darkness around me. It wasn't coming from any direction. It simply existed, growing stronger. With it came a tunnel-like formation, a passageway of swirling light and color. I felt drawn to it, pulled by a force that was both gentle and irresistible. As I entered the tunnel, I was surrounded by the most beautiful, indescribable light, brighter than anything I'd ever seen. Yet it didn't hurt to look at. It was alive somehow, pulsing with love and knowledge. I was moving through it rapidly, yet I could perceive every nuance of its radiance. Somewhere in the distance, I heard what sounded like music. Not just sounds, but the essence of music, as if all the beautiful melodies that had ever existed or would exist were playing in perfect harmony. It filled me with a sense of joy and recognition. I'm dying, I realized, but the thought brought no fear. Instead, I felt a profound sense of wonder and anticipation. Where was this tunnel leading me? What waited on the other side? As I moved deeper into the light, I began to sense presences around me. Not visible forms, but consciousness, warm, welcoming, and familiar, though I couldn't identify them. They seemed to be accompanying me on my journey, guiding me forward. The tunnel stretched on, and I continued to accelerate. The physical world I had known was now completely gone, replaced by this extraordinary passage of light. I had no body, yet I had never felt more real, more awake, more alive. Whatever was happening, whatever I was becoming, it felt right. It felt like truth. And then the tunnel opened up, and I was somewhere else entirely. As the tunnel of light dissolved around me, I found myself in a vast, limitless space that defied all earthly description. It wasn't a physical landscape with boundaries or horizons, more like a realm of pure consciousness, where thought and reality were one and the same. The light that had guided me through the tunnel was now everywhere, not shining upon things but emanating from within them. Within me, within the very fabric of this strange new reality. I existed in a state of profound awareness, perceiving everything with senses I didn't know I possessed. Colors appeared that I had never seen before, vibrant and alive, shifting and blending in ways that would be impossible in the physical world. Sounds, or what my mind interpreted as sounds, flowed around me like liquid harmony, creating patterns that somehow conveyed meaning beyond language. Time no longer functioned as I understood it. Instead of moving in a linear fashion, moments seemed to exist simultaneously, layered upon one another like transparent sheets. I could focus on any particular when and experience it fully, then shift to another with just a thought. It was disorienting at first, but then strangely familiar, as if I was remembering how to navigate a place I had always known. As my awareness expanded, I began to sense the presence of others, countless others, existing in this dimensionless space alongside me. They weren't visible in any conventional sense, but I could feel them, their consciousnesses touching the edges of mine like gentle waves lapping at a shore. Some felt ancient and vast, filled with wisdom accumulated over eons. Others seemed newer, still learning to navigate this realm. All of them radiated a sense of peace and purpose that made my earthly concerns seem distant and small. In this state of expanded awareness, I suddenly understood that I was experiencing only the threshold of something much greater. This was a transition point, a place of preparation before moving deeper into whatever lay beyond. I was being given time to acclimate, to shed the limitations of physical existence, and embrace a more profound reality. Knowledge seemed to flow into me from all directions, not as discrete facts, but as deep understanding. I comprehended in an instant the interconnectedness of all things, how every action, every thought, every moment of my life had been part of a vast, intricate pattern. I saw how my choices had affected others in ways I had never realized, rippling outward in ever-widening circles. Some of these revelations brought joy, others a profound sense of regret. I understood that the baby growing inside my physical body was a soul with its own journey, its own purpose. The realization filled me with both love and sorrow, love for this being I would never know in life, and sorrow for the choice I had made that would deny us both that experience. As these thoughts flowed through me, the environment began to change. The all-encompassing light started to dim, almost imperceptibly at first, then more noticeably. The harmonious sounds grew fainter, replaced by a subtle discordance that raised an unfamiliar sensation within me, something akin to unease, though more profound. The presences I had sensed around me began to withdraw, their consciousnesses receding from mine, like the tide pulling away from shore. In their place came a growing sense of isolation, a cooling of the warmth that had enveloped me. I tried to call out to them, to reach for them with my consciousness, but they continued to fade until I felt entirely alone. The light dimmed further, taking on a strange bluish cast that seemed to absorb rather than emit. The boundless space began to feel confined, as if invisible walls were closing in around me. The beautiful, impossible colors I had perceived earlier were fading to monochrome, then to something darker still. I felt a downward pull, a slow but inexorable descent. Not physical, but spiritual, as if the very essence of what I had become was sinking into some lower state of being. With this descent came a growing heaviness, a return of limitations I thought I had shed. My expanded awareness began to contract, focusing once more on a single point of perception, rather than the all-encompassing understanding I had briefly experienced. The harmonious sounds had now completely disappeared, replaced by a profound silence that seemed to press against me from all directions. Then, emerging from that silence, came the faintest whisper, so quiet I strained to perceive it, yet somehow cutting through everything else. It was a voice, or perhaps many voices speaking in unison, uttering words I couldn't quite comprehend but that filled me with an instinctive dread. As I continued to descend, the darkness thickened around me, no longer merely the absence of light, but something active and oppressive. It moved like smoke, curling and twisting, occasionally taking on vague shapes before dissolving again. These shapes seemed vaguely familiar, distorted reflections of people and places from my life, but twisted into cruel parodies of themselves. I saw Thomas's face, contorted with a cruelty that went beyond his casual dismissal of me in life. I saw my parents, their expressions frozen in perpetual disappointment. I saw myself, my features warped into something barely recognizable, mocking my own failures and fears. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. They spoke of worthlessness, of irredeemable failure, of a soul beyond salvation. They reminded me of every selfish action, every unkind word, every moment of weakness throughout my life. They spoke of the life I had tried to end and the life I had chosen to end with my own. They spoke of justice and payment due. "This is what you deserve," they hissed. "This is what you chose." And I believed them. How could I not? The evidence of my failings was all around me, reflected in the swirling darkness. The weight of my actions pressed down upon me with undeniable force. I had turned away from light and love. Darkness and isolation were my just reward. As this realization settled over me, the descent accelerated. I was falling now, plummeting through layers of increasing darkness towards some unknown destination far below. The voices grew into a cacophony of accusation and condemnation, drowning out my thoughts, filling me with a despair so profound it seemed to have physical weight. The darkness continued to thicken until it was almost solid, pressing against me from all sides. I could feel it seeping into me, filling the spaces where light had once been, corrupting the brief glimpse of transcendence I had experienced. It wasn't merely darkness, it was absence, negation, the utter lack of everything good and beautiful and true. And still I fell, helpless to stop my descent, unable even to cry out against it. This, I understood with terrible clarity, was judgment, not imposed by some external force, but the natural consequence of my own choices, my own turning away from light and love. Time had no meaning in this place, but the descent seemed endless. I fell through layer after layer of darkness, each deeper and more oppressive than the last. The accusatory voices followed me, growing louder and more numerous, until they seemed to come not just from around me but from within me as well. At some point, it could have been moments or millennia. The quality of the darkness changed. It began to take on a dull reddish glow, not illuminating, but somehow making the darkness more visible. With this change came a new sensation: heat. Not the gentle warmth of sunlight or hearth, but a searing, oppressive heat that seemed to penetrate to the core of my being. The darkness parted slightly, revealing glimpses of a landscape unlike anything I had ever seen. Jagged rocks stretched in all directions, their surfaces glistening like obsidian. The sky, if it could be called that, was a roiling mass of smoke and ash, shot through with veins of angry red light. The air was thick with the stench of sulfur and decay. I was no longer falling but standing on solid ground. Though I still had no physical body, instead, I existed as a concentration of consciousness, a point of awareness trapped in this nightmarish realm. Around me, I sensed other presences, different from the benevolent ones I had encountered earlier. These radiated malice and despair in equal measure. They moved through the darkness like shadows given form, approaching and retreating, circling me like predators. I could feel their attention focused on me, their interest a tangible thing, cold and invasive. They seemed to be evaluating me, measuring my fear, savoring my growing despair. One of them moved closer, its presence more defined than the others. Though it had no fixed form, shifting constantly between vague approximations of human and animal shapes, I could perceive its ancient nature. This was a being that had existed in darkness for eons, that understood the infinite variations of suffering and despair. "Welcome," it whispered, its voice somehow inside my mind rather than heard with ears. "You belong with us now." No, I tried to protest, but had no voice here, no way to resist. Yes, it insisted, its presence expanding to surround me. "You chose this. You rejected life. You rejected love. You rejected the Creator. This is the consequence of that choice." The other shadows drew closer, their presences merging with the first, until I was completely enveloped in their collective malevolence. I could feel them penetrating my consciousness, exploring my memories, finding every weakness, every fear, every shame. So much potential, one whispered, so casually discarded. 2 lives ended by one selfish choice, said another. Abandoned faith, a third observed. Abandoned family, abandoned responsibility. Abandoned by God, concluded the first, its voice carrying a note of triumph. No, I thought again, desperately. God, please. The shadows laughed, a sound that contained no mirth, only cruel mockery. Your prayers come too late, they told me. You had your chances. You made your choice. Their presence tightened around me, constricting like a physical force. I felt myself being compressed, diminished, reduced to nothing but pain and regret and fear. This, I understood, was what waited for me, an eternity of torment, not imposed by these entities, but invited by my own actions. The heat intensified, becoming an inferno that consumed without destroying. The shadows continued their merciless invasion of my consciousness, bringing every failure, every sin, every moment of weakness into sharp, unbearable focus. There was no escaping their scrutiny, no hiding from the truth of what I had done and what I had become. Time stretched endlessly. There was no respite, no moment of relief from the torment. The shadows showed me visions of what might have been, the life I could have lived, the person I could have become, the child who would never be born. They showed me my parents, devastated by my death, their lives forever shadowed by grief and unanswerable questions. They showed me Thomas, briefly shaken by the news, but quickly returning to his selfish existence, my memory fading from his mind until I was nothing but a vague, uncomfortable recollection. In the midst of this torment, as I was being reduced to a single point of suffering consciousness, something unexpected happened. From somewhere deep within me, from a place the shadows hadn't reached, a memory surfaced, not of my recent life, but of something much earlier. I remembered being a small child, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, sitting in Sunday school. The teacher had been telling us about Jesus, about his love for all people, especially the lost and the broken. Jesus loves you no matter what, she had said. Her kind eyes meeting mine. No matter how far you go, how lost you feel, he will always find you if you call to him. This memory, this tiny spark of light in the overwhelming darkness, gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. With every bit of will I had left, I formed a thought, not even a proper prayer, just a desperate cry from the depths of my being. Jesus, help me, please find me. The moment this thought took form, something changed in the oppressive atmosphere around me. The shadows recoiled slightly, their presence less certain, their grip loosening almost imperceptibly. A new tension filled the air, as if 2 opposing forces were suddenly in conflict. The shadows pressed in again, more insistent now, their whispers becoming frantic. It's too late, they insisted. You're ours. You chose us. But something was happening, something they couldn't prevent. In the distance, though distance had no real meaning in this place, a new light appeared. Unlike the consuming flames around me, this light was pure and clear, cutting through the darkness like a sword. It was approaching rapidly, growing stronger with each moment. The shadows scattered before it, retreating into the deeper darkness with wails of rage and frustration. The oppressive heat began to recede, replaced by a cool, gentle breeze that soothed my tormented consciousness. And then he was there. The presence that arrived was unlike anything I had ever encountered. More real, more substantial than even the physical world I had left behind. It was as if everything I had experienced until that moment, both in life and in this afterlife state, had been a mere shadow, a dim reflection of true reality. And now, finally, I was in the presence of ultimate truth. Light emanated from him, but to call it merely light is woefully inadequate. It was radiance in its purest form, alive, intelligent, and filled with such love that it seemed impossible for any being to contain it. Yet this radiance had personality, consciousness, identity. It was both the light itself and the source of all light. I knew, without being told, without a single word being spoken, that I was in the presence of Jesus Christ. The shadows that had tormented me were now completely gone, banished to the furthest reaches of this dark realm by his mere approach. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, replaced by a pocket of peace and clarity that surrounded us like a protective sphere. I expected judgment. I deserved judgment. But what flowed from him instead was pure, unconditional love. A love so powerful and all-encompassing that it seemed to rewrite the very fabric of reality around us. This love wasn't blind to my failings. Rather, it saw them with perfect clarity and loved me anyway, completely, without reservation. Then he began to take form, condensing the pure light into a shape I could comprehend. He appeared as a man, yet so much more than a man. His features were Middle Eastern, olive-skinned with dark hair and beard, yet they seemed to shift subtly, as if no single human appearance could fully capture his essence. His eyes held the depth of eternity, wells of compassion so profound that I felt I could fall into them forever and never reach the bottom. He wore simple robes of white, though the material seemed to be woven from light itself. His hands, oh, his hands! They bore the unmistakable marks of crucifixion, not as gruesome wounds, but as badges of honor, radiant symbols of a sacrifice beyond understanding. These marks pulsed with their own light, telling a story of love so vast it had reshaped the cosmos. Sophia, he spoke, and his voice was unlike any I had ever heard. It resonated not just in what passed for ears in this state, but throughout my entire being. It was simultaneously a whisper and a symphony, intimate yet boundlessly powerful. My name in his mouth became more than just a name. It became a truth, a revelation of who I truly was beneath all the layers of fear and failure and self-deception. You called to me, he continued, and I have always come for those who call. I wanted to speak, to respond, but found myself overwhelmed by his presence. What could I possibly say to this being who knew me more completely than I knew myself? He smiled then, and it was like the dawn breaking after the longest night. You don't need words here, he said gently. I know your heart. And he did. I could feel him perceiving every aspect of me, not just my actions or choices, but the complex web of fears, desires, wounds, and hopes that had shaped those choices. He saw the lonely girl who had sought validation in the wrong places. He saw the frightened teenager who had made a desperate choice out of shame and terror. He saw every flaw, every weakness, every sin, and he loved me still. But I don't deserve this, I managed to communicate, not with words, but with the essence of my thought. I turned away from you. I tried to end my life. And the baby. His expression grew solemn, but not less loving. No soul is beyond my love, Sophia. No sin beyond my forgiveness. I paid the price for all of it. He extended his hand toward me, the crucifixion mark clearly visible. As he did so, I became aware of my own form in this place, not physical, but a shape of light dimmed by darkness, stained by the shadows that had invaded me. His light began to flow into this form, illuminating me from within, driving out the lingering darkness. With this illumination came understanding, not intellectual, but visceral. I experienced, in a moment outside of time, the fullness of his love for humanity, for me specifically. I felt the weight of my actions, not as condemnation, but as reality fully perceived. I understood the ripple effects of my choices, the pain they had caused and would cause. And alongside this understanding came the offer of complete forgiveness. He wasn't dismissing what I had done or its consequences. He was offering to transform it, to to bring healing and redemption even from the darkest moment of my life. There is always another way, he said, his voice filled with gentle authority. Always a path back to light, no matter how far into darkness you have wandered. As he spoke, the oppressive landscape around us began to recede. The jagged rocks, the sulfurous air, the red-tinged darkness. All of it was pushed back by his expanding presence until we stood in a bubble of pure light. What happens now? I asked, awed by the transformation taking place around and within me. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw both infinite compassion and something else. A question, an offer, a choice. That, he said softly, depends on you. I didn't understand at first. Wasn't I dead? Hadn't I already determined my fate through my actions? Reading my confusion, he smiled again. Your earthly body hasn't yet released you completely. There is still a connection, however faint. If you choose to return, you can. Return. Go back to the mess I had made, to the shame and the fear and the overwhelming responsibility. The thought was terrifying. I'm afraid, I admitted. I know, he said, his voice warm with understanding. But you would not return alone. I would be with you, as I have always been, though you didn't recognize my presence. And if I choose not to return? I asked, though I already sensed the answer. His expression grew solemn. Then your soul would move on from this place, and the child's soul with it. 2 journeys ended before their time. The child. In all my fear and desperation, I had tried not to think of the life growing inside me as a real person, with a soul and a future. But here, in the presence of truth himself, such self-deception was impossible. I had been carrying a unique, precious soul, a being with its own purpose in the great tapestry of existence. Can I see? I asked hesitantly. He nodded once, and suddenly I could perceive another presence near us, small, new, but distinctly real. Not fully formed, but filled with potential, with purpose. A soul in the earliest stages of its journey. My child. The love that swept through me then was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Fierce, protective, and absolutely unconditional. This wasn't an inconvenience or a mistake. This was my child. In that moment, I would have done anything to protect this tiny soul, to give it the chance it deserved. If I go back, I said, my resolve strengthening, can I save the baby? His eyes held mine, infinitely gentle, yet unflinching in their honesty. The damage to your physical body is severe, Sophia. The substances you took have already affected the child. I cannot promise that either of you will survive even if you return. That is beyond the choice I am offering you. Then what is the choice? Whether to fight for life, both your own and the child's, or to surrender to death. I cannot guarantee an outcome. I considered his words carefully. Return to a damaged body, to a life in shambles, with no guarantee that the baby or I would survive? Or move on to whatever awaited souls after death, taking my unborn child with me. I considered everything, the darkness I had experienced, the light that had rescued me, the love that surrounded me now, and the difficult path that might lie ahead if I chose to return. It wasn't an easy decision, but in my heart, I knew what I wanted to choose. I want to go back, I said finally. I want to try. For the baby, for my parents, for myself. His smile was like sunrise after the longest night. Then go with my blessing, Sophia. Know that I am with you always, even to the end of the age. He reached out and touched my forehead with his scarred hand. At his touch, a surge of warmth and light flowed through me, filling every part of my consciousness with peace and strength. It wasn't the removal of all fear or doubt, but rather the assurance that these things need not define or defeat me. Remember, he said, his voice beginning to fade as I felt myself being drawn back toward the physical world, that your worth is not determined by your mistakes, but by my love for you. Nothing can separate you from that love. Not death, not life, not angels or demons, not the present or the future, not any powers, not height or depth, not anything else in all creation. His words wrapped around me like a protective mantle as the light began to recede. I felt myself moving rapidly away from his direct presence, being pulled back through layers of existence toward the physical realm. Yet I didn't feel abandoned. Somehow I knew he was still with me, would always be with me, just as he had promised. The journey back was different from the journey out. Instead of a tunnel of light, I experienced a series of rapid transitions, like moving through veils of increasingly dense reality. With each transition, I felt heavier, more limited, more confined to a single perspective. And then, suddenly, there was pain. Intense, all-encompassing physical pain that told me I was returning to my body after the transcendent states I had experienced. The limitations of physical existence felt shockingly restrictive, like being forced into a container far too small. There were voices around me, urgent and professional, beeping machines, the smell of antiseptic, hands touching my body, working with practiced efficiency. BP dropping, she's going into VFib, charging to 200, clear. A jolt of electricity coursed through my body, my back arched involuntarily. Still in VFib, charging to 300, clear. Another jolt, more powerful than the first. And then, with a sensation like being slammed back into myself from a great height, I was fully present in my body again. We've got rhythm, BP stabilizing. Sophia, can you hear me? My eyelids felt impossibly heavy, but with tremendous effort, I managed to open them. Blinding fluorescent lights, blurry figures in scrubs, the cold plastic of an oxygen mask over my nose and mouth. She's back, someone said, wonder mingling with professional detachment. 11 minutes and 40 seconds with minimal cerebral perfusion. It's a miracle she's conscious at all. I tried to speak, to ask about the baby, but no sound would come. A hand took mine, squeezed gently. Don't try to talk yet, Sophia, a gentle voice said. You're in the hospital. You're going to be okay. I didn't know if that was true, if I would be okay, if the baby would be okay, if anything would ever be okay again. But I did know, with absolute certainty, that I wasn't alone. The presence I had encountered in that place beyond life had returned with me, subtler now, but undeniably real. And for the moment, that was enough. The hospital room came into sharper focus as my eyes adjusted to the harsh lighting. Every breath brought pain, my throat raw from the stomach pumping, my chest sore from the compressions and defibrillator. But the pain confirmed something vital. I was alive. Against all odds, I had been given another chance. The days that followed were a blur of medical procedures, psychiatric evaluations, and tearful conversations with my parents. Through it all, the doctors fought not just for my life, but for my babies as well. Against the odds, both our hearts continued to beat. My parents, after their initial shock, surrounded me with a love I couldn't have imagined in my darkest moments. My father, usually so stoic, wept openly when I told them what I had experienced. We almost lost you, he whispered, his voice breaking. God brought you back to us. 6 months later, I gave birth to a daughter, small but perfectly formed, with no lasting effects from my terrible mistake. I named her Grace, for the undeserved gift she was. As I held her in my arms for the first time, the memory of that tiny soul I had glimpsed in the presence of Jesus came flooding back, and I wept with gratitude. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. I had deferred college, moved back home, and faced countless challenges as a teenage mother. But each time I looked into Grace's eyes, I knew with certainty that I had made the right choice in fighting to return. Now, 10 years later, as I watch Grace playing in our backyard, her laughter carrying on the summer breeze, I am reminded daily of how close I came to losing everything. I've shared my story in church youth groups and high schools, hoping to reach other young people who might be standing where I once stood, believing there was no way forward. There is always another path, always a way back to light, no matter how far into darkness you have wandered. And sometimes, when the afternoon sun filters through the curtains just so, casting long shadows across our living room floor, I feel his presence again, gentle, unwavering, and full of a love that transcends all understanding.